Nigeria's call, obey, to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith. The labor of our heroes past shall never be in vain. To serve with heart and might, one nation bound in freedom, peace and unity. O God of creation, direct our noble cause. Guide our leaders right. Help our youth the truth to know. In love and honesty to grow and live in just and true. Great lofty heights attain to build a nation where peace and justice shall reign. School anthem. We're a covenant generation, pursuing excellence, redeemed to reign, learning to lead. We're bound by an oath, obeying rules to rule, making kings of youth, flying high on covenant wings. Wisdom's call for change, inspired on fire, with courage marching on in grace. God's own arrow shot for glory. Covenant generation, arise, leader and knowledge to shine. Glorious foundation stone, leadership skills to show. Departing from knowledge to empowerment, legalism to realism. Wisdom's call for change, inspired on fire, with courage marching on in grace. God's own arrow shot for glory.
Clap and welcome the Vice Chancellor of Covenant University, the chief host of this event, Professor Isaac Obayan, to read our welcome address and introduce the chairman of the occasion.
It is my very special privilege on the occasion of an epoch-making event such as we are gathered to most respectfully introduce the chairman of today's event and Chancellor, Covenant University, the Chairman Board of Regents of Covenant University, as I ask you all in a most excited applause, welcome Dr. David Oyeyinka. 。
Clap and welcome the Vice Chancellor of Covenant University, the chief host of this event, Professor Isaac Obayan, to read our welcome address and introduce the chairman of the occasion.
It is my very special privilege It is not on every platform that we are privileged to have the visionary himself be part of such a historic event, the launch of the UN Habitat Global Report, holding today on the 18th of October 2011. It's my privilege again to welcome the Chancellor, Covenant University, Dr. David Oyebanji. It's also my privilege on this occasion to recognize, as have already been introduced, members of the Board of Regents, Covenant University. We're all so pleased and glad that you are here today. I recognize, as will be introduced when they arrive, the Excellencies, Governors of Lagos State and Ogun State. May I especially recognize this morning the Director, UN Habitat, Professor Oyebanji, Oyeyinka, all the way from the UN Habitat Office in Nairobi. And I know not too long from now, we'll be listening to him. I recognize all members of the management of Covenant University, all protocols already rolled out, also in place. The Deputy Head of UN Nigerian Office, Mr. Paul Okola, I also welcome and recognize on this occasion. Members of the Diplomatic Corps here present, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Covenant University, the Registrar, Covenant University. And as we talk about human settlements, it is a great privilege to have His Royal Highness, the Olota of Ota, Oba Olaniyi Oyede, Kabiyesi, sir, we welcome you today, and other Royal Highnesses who are here present. On such an occasion as Covenant University makes history, we are privileged to recognize Professor Grace Alela Williams, a most worthy daughter of Africa, a mother, great inspiration, who herself made history as the very first female vice-chancellor on the Nigerian university platform, and has continued to make history as a renowned professor. Great impact. My privilege this morning, Ma, to welcome you. Directors General here present, our eminent professors here present, wonderful vice-chancellors as already introduced, and the ones who would yet be introducing, distinguished guests, members of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to Covenant University on behalf of the Chancellor and Chair Board of Regents, Covenant University, Dr. David Oyebanji. May I also say that today at the official launch of the Global Report, GRHS 2011, Covenant University is collaborating with the UN Habitat. Today's event is certainly an epoch-making one, and this is the very first of its kind in any university in Africa. The Global Report 2011 has only been launched at the London School of Economics in the United Kingdom and Columbia University in the United States of America. The GRHS 2011, the Global Report, addresses cities and climate change. It provides a most authoritative and up-to-date assessment of conditions and trends in walled cities and other human settlements. I'm sure we'll be getting to know more about that report when we get to that segment. But the report ties in significantly with a lot of the goals and objectives of Covenant University. As we look at our vision and mission trust as a university, we see that it is driven on the wheels of human development ethos in attending to quality of life and total man development promotions. We see this collaboration, therefore, with the UN Habitat as a validation of our current strategic focus in this current academic session, 2011-2012, which is expanding our frontiers, securing the future. There is certainly an urgent need to chart the paths of relevance in the efficiency and effectiveness of the solutions that we prefer in ensuring sustainable results. Universities must continue to forge viable linkages and partnerships in galvanizing potential, expertise, and resources to improve the human condition. We are therefore making a bold statement as a university, as we know that by hosting the launch of the UN Habitat Global Report on Human Settlements, we are furthering our commitment to raising awareness on human settlement issues, population crisis, and the plight of the less privileged in societies as we work assiduously to actualize our vision to be a leading world-class university committed to raising a new generation of leaders in all fields of human endeavor. As these issues of great concern are addressed, such as we will be doing today, we commend the great work done by the management team of the UN Habitat in putting this great report together, as well as acknowledge the contributions of Professor Oyeybanji Oyeyinka, the Director, MDR, UN Habitat, in driving the realization of this event and worthy dividends to come. We continue to celebrate and appreciate the visionary and transformational leadership of the Chancellor, Covenant University, Dr. David Oyedepo, as we see the vision intensified by his invigorating, passionate, relentless commitment and belief in the emergence of a new generation Harvard that Covenant University is poised to become in the not-so-distant future. It is noteworthy that at the launch of the Global Report 2011, it is happening on the heels of the 9th Founders Day, the anniversary of our 9th Founders Day in Covenant University, which comes up on the 21st of October, 2011. As we step into our 10th year as a university, we appreciate God Almighty for his ever-abiding grace over the affairs and operations of Covenant University as we look forward to the future with great hope and trust in him. Let me say a few things about our context, noting that this particular event is also marking a great milestone in Covenant University as we step into our 10th year on the 21st of October this year. May I say that Covenant University will turn 9 solid years. Covenant University was birthed with a departure philosophy to revolutionize the educational landscape of Africa and help restore the dignity of Africa and Africans. May I say that in 9 years, and also noting all the events that have happened, particularly in the last academic session, we are pleased to announce that this mandate in education is indeed a rescue mission in education, driven on the platform of a Christian mission ethos to transform life's values and restore the dignity of the black man. The university's focus over the last 9 years has seen to a number of great awards won on the platform of Covenant University. However, I will be limiting the listing to just this last academic session. The university was ranked among top 100 universities in Africa and the top 10 in Nigeria in the Webometric ranking 2011. As we talk about groundbreaking events such as this, it's important to note that our outreach is not just to the Nigerian context. Our outreach is indeed to the global context. The university signed also a number of MOUs, and one such one with the United Nations Habitat was signed on the 19th of July this year, and this launch is part of extending the frontiers of that relationship. The university also won rights to be an Autodesk training center and one of only 2,000 such centers recognized all over the world. And therefore, Covenant University is among only 2 universities in Nigeria to have that training center, the Autodesk Training Center. Covenant University also won the first ever Ideas Trophy on the platform of Unilever just about a month ago, with 3 students of Covenant University emerging as number 1 and tying with the University of Ibadan. The university also won a bronze medal for her locally produced school management program software in 2011 Inventions Fair, which held in Stockholm, Sweden, and the university also returned first in the category of Best Innovation Design, also at that fair. The university won the U.S. SUSI Award to represent Nigeria and West African sub-region in the 2011 edition, hosted at Ohio University, Columbus, USA. To date, the university has hosted over 5 international conferences and workshops, and a lot more still to come. Only in June this year, Covenant University hosted the Association of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities, and she emerged as the very first private university to host all universities' vice chancellors in June this year, and it was a very successful outing. Our faculty continue to win Junior Fulbright Awards, Academy of Science Awards for the developing nations, and of course, a number of research postdoctoral fellowships from the African Humanities Program. For these and all that God has done in 9 years as we enter our 10th year, to him be all the glory in Jesus' name. To date, Covenant University has graduated 78 PhD students, 168 master's degree awarded, and to date, 7,438 undergraduates released from the Covenant University context. Again, as we celebrate our 9th year and on this epoch-making event, may I reiterate the words of the Chancellor of Covenant University at the very first matriculation ceremony, January 2003, to be precise, 31st of January, in envisioning future pathways for Covenant University. And I quote, "We emphasize again that we are in a revolution, and this will only be reflected both in teaching, research, and in community work. We are committed to producing into the labor force active agents of change whose appearance will lead to new demonstrations of integrity, probity, acidity, and sustained growth. This university, in the next few years, certainly before its 10th anniversary, will have become a major center of excellence in the world and a pride to the nation and an institution that the entire world will be proud to be associated with." End of quote. We are privileged as a university, therefore, as we give glory to God, to host the launch for the very first time on any platform in the whole of the African continent, the launch of the UN Global Report. It is again with great pleasure that I welcome you all, and I wish you a most inspiring and enjoyable time in Covenant University, and may God bless you all richly. Thank you.
I will quickly invite the Covenant University choir, the classical choir, to suit this moment. Covenant University classical choir.
Hallelujah.
Classical Choir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You may have your seat. Covenant University Classical Choir, heralding this day, heralding this event, heralding what we have come to celebrate, history in Covenant University. And in that mood, I want to quickly invite the Vice Chancellor to invite the Director from the United Nations Nairobi office. Nairobi, Kenya is the headquarters of UN in the whole of Africa. So I'll be inviting the Vice Chancellor to make the necessary introduction and usher us to the next item on the agenda. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Isaiah Obama.
The chairperson of this most memorable occasion and Chancellor Covenant University, Dr. David Oyeyinka. Sir, it is my privilege on this occasion to introduce the special guest, Professor Banji Oyeyinka, who is currently Director, Monitoring and Research Division, UN Habitat, Nairobi, Kenya, a professional fellow in Innovation and Development, United Nations University, Merit Matric, the Netherlands, and visiting professor in Innovation and Development, the Open University, Milton Keynes, United Kingdom. His research interests are in science, technology and innovation policy and systems. And today, as Covenant University also joins the league of other world-class centers, talking about University of Columbia and London School of Economics, it is my privilege to ask us all to most heartily put our hands together as we receive the special guest, Professor Banji Oyeyinka, to the podium. You're most welcome, sir, all the way from Nairobi UN Habitat Office on this occasion of the launch of the UN Global Report. A more resounding welcome for our special guest, Professor Oyeyinka. Most welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. The Chancellor and Chairman Board of Regents, Dr. David Oyeyinka, Excellencies, Governors, members of Regent Covenant University, the VC, Your Royal Highnesses, the Registrar of the University, Director Generals here, eminent professors, and all our colleagues, all protocols duly observed. It is for me an honor and a privilege to be here. Today is not just the launching of a global report of the United Nations. Today we are celebrating vision. Today is a celebration of excellence. Today for me also is a personal testimony of what Dr. David Oyeyinka called the interconnectedness of human destinies. I have been connected with him for many, many years. But this is not a place to give such testimonies. Even before he ever knew about me. And my coming here, I believe, is by divine connection. It happened at a very auspicious time on the 1st of January 2011 at midnight. We had a very interesting meeting with the Vice Chancellor, Professor Shuremekun, and a couple of colleagues. And it was also surreal. All of us left that meeting thinking, this is something different. There had been a word of prophecy gone forth about the connection of Covenant University with the United Nations. And before we knew it, it was unfolding before our very eyes. And we, I believe, were just privileged to be the purveyors of that vision. Just a few personal remarks before I go into this report. One of the colleagues here, Professor Shuremekun, we the daughter came to us for an internship. And after she finished the internship, her whole thesis, she's a mathematician, she's doing her PhD in the United States. Everything she wanted to do, she completely changed it because of the access that she had to our database, the interaction with colleagues and so forth. And she went back to her university. The supervisor called me and said, you have changed this young lady's focus completely. And I said, I agree with it, but will you be happy to be a member of his PhD board? And I said, I will happily do that, because I had a number of other PhD students I was supervising from my former place. I was at the United Nations University for 6 years, teaching there, before I moved to my current. And therefore, again, by this interconnectedness of human destinies, Professor Shuremekun came here, and he started calling me and said, what you did for my daughter, why don't you do it for Covenant University? Why don't you? So why don't you do it for other young people? And we were very blessed that we had a vice chancellor who was sold out to the vision. We are blessed that we have Dr. David Oyedepo. Without casting aspersion on anyone, we've tried to interest many organizations, agencies of government, in what we do at the UN, but we've not really had any sustained progress in this direction. And therefore, when I saw their passion, I saw the way they embraced what we were doing, we just decided to go all out and be partners with them. And I know that this is going to be the beginning of many great things for us in the future. Now, as a prefix to the report, why are we worried about the urban context? Why is the United Nations spending a lot of energy, a lot of resources on the issue of urban? For the last 50 years, for those who are familiar with the development studies, the emphasis had always been on the rural. The emphasis had been that we should try to develop the rural areas. But we have seen over the time that human migration, natural birth in cities and the urban areas is inevitable. It's very difficult to stop people from moving from one area to the other. And so has it been that in the last few years, 50% of all human beings now live in cities. Not too long ago, it used to be that the urbanization intensity was far lower than what we have now. And therefore, attention began to shift to understanding the complex nature of what is happening in our cities. And there are three key patterns that we have observed, particularly related to the poorer countries, the poorer regions of the world, that has made it almost inevitable that the UN had to enact a major statute to study the urban. Number one is that the kind of urbanization, in other words, the increase in the population of cities that we have seen in the last 30 years, the nature of it has been very different from what we had in Europe and the Americas and the more industrialized areas in the last 30 years. What has happened in Africa and much of South Asia is that people migrate to the cities in hope. Number two, people are also pushed out of the rural areas because of poverty, lack of access to basic services, water, sanitation, electricity, and so forth. And of course, in many parts of Africa, due to conflicts and wars, but people were forced, they were pushed out of the rural areas into the cities with the hope that either they will get a job or they will live a better life. The urbanization that we saw, or that history recorded in much of Europe and America, was a pull factor. It wasn't a push factor. People were pulled to the cities because there were jobs, there were factories, there were services to be provided. They were pulled there because of opportunities that were available in the cities. Today is very different. So the pattern of urbanization that we have in Africa and much of South Asia is one of being pushed out, not being pulled in. People are being pushed out because they want a better life. Number two is that because of the unplanned nature of urbanization, because we are not prepared for the migration and the high level of growth of human beings in the cities, we have recorded a huge formation of slums in cities. Our neighborhoods have been degraded because we didn't plan for them. In the UN Habitat terminology, they call it chaotic urbanization. Chaotic urbanization, because we didn't plan for the people coming, we didn't plan the transportation, we didn't plan. That's why you have congestion. We didn't plan for water. That's why everybody has become their own local government. You have to dig your own borehole. We didn't plan enough for electricity. For 25 years, Nigeria did not invest a penny in installed capacity of electricity. That's why in Covenant University, they have to rely on private provision of electricity. Because we didn't plan for this. Much unlike other countries who saw very far off and planned for the migration and natural birth of people. Therefore, we have in cities slums. And how do we define slum formation? There are 5 criteria that the UN Habitat had come up with that defines what is a slum household or what is a slum community. When you lack 2 or 3 of the following. Number 1, when is a household or a community does not have adequate structure of housing. In other words, you are living in a place that can fall down anytime. Number 2, when you have overcrowding. Overcrowding is defined in the UN terminology as when you have more than 3 people living in a normal room. Number 3, when you lack proper sanitation. Proper sanitation means that when you don't have toilet facilities. And number 4, when you don't have water. Water is a major source of diseases, lack of water. In fact, what we have tracked, when you look at all the correlation that we do in the UN, it is sometimes often not because people are not vaccinated, but because they drink bad water. Because there's no water to wash your hands when you finish in the toilet. And therefore, we have recorded in many parts of the world where you have outbreak of malaria simply because of lack of water. And the 5th criteria for defining a slum is when you don't have the security of tenure. In other words, you cannot claim ownership of the home, or you do not even have the means to pay the rent. So these 5 criteria define what a slum is. And what many countries and cities and metropolitan areas have tried to do is to remove as many of these factors. For instance, in Brazil, President Lula was popular up to the last day. He was recording 80% in the polls, simply because he attacked the slums. If, for instance, the major crisis in a particular slum is water and sanitation, he goes there and begins to put water. One of the issues for planners also is that many of our slums, when you go there, they don't have streets. There are no basic streets. I'm giving this prefix before I go into the climate change discussion. There are no streets. I give an example. Manhattan was planned in 1811. 35% of Manhattan spatial area is actually given to streets. And that is why up till now, you go to Manhattan, no one dares to build beyond the constraint of 35%. And that is why the value of land in Manhattan is so valuable. Now, we have been trying to plot in many cities, both in Africa and Asia. In the last 3 months, we've been doing an exercise trying to see what proportion of land or what proportion of a space has been devoted to different cities of the world. We have done about 26 cities now, and we can make the data available we'll make it available to Covenant University. We found that on average, most European cities all fall into that category of 35%, 32%. Actually, Manhattan is about 36%, Barcelona is about 35%, Paris, most of them. An average slum in Africa, most of them have 2%, less than 2% of the land devoted to streets and public space. This is the formation of slums. Because if there is, for instance, fire, we found, for instance, recently in Kibera, this is the biggest slum in Africa, almost close to 1 million people in one place, in Nairobi. When there is a fire incident, the fire truck cannot go through the street, so everybody just got burned down. So, in other words, these are what you call the infrastructural deficits that you find in very poor countries. Why am I dwelling on this? Because the nature of climate change and our response to this has to do a lot with what we do with where we live. And that is why when you come to a place like this, you feel so happy. You don't even know you are in Africa, I'm sorry to say. Therefore, it's because of this that the UN General Assembly gave the mandate to UN, first slide please, to UN Habitat to begin to examine what is it about cities, how does it contribute to issues of climate change, and as you all saw in the last couple of months in Lagos, how flooding had caused so much devastation. For those who are watching the news also, you've seen Thailand in the last 2 weeks, whole towns were submerged underwater. In the United States, we remember Katrina. We remember even recently many parts of the world being subjected to the adverse consequences of climate change. And in large part, they are due to long terms of neglect, lack of planning, which I said led to chaotic urbanization. Everybody just sit wherever they like. Everyone will connect whatever they like. Everybody will build wherever they like. We saw what happened in Ibadan recently. People build on whatever they see. And this has a lot to say about our own institutions, about our respect for rules, our respect for laws. The key, so the climate change issue is part and parcel of the whole urbanization agenda. And this is why I gave this short background. Now, for the climate change perspective, the UN gave the assembly. Now, remember, every agency of the UN must take their mandate from the General Assembly, which is the assembly of all nations. Nigeria is part of the signatories to the United Nations mandates on all issues, including climate change, MDGs, and so forth. Therefore, the United States, the UN member states constitute the UN. Without the member states, there's no UN. But also, our partners, like universities, professional bodies, are part of the UN. That's why I can stand here and do what I'm doing. Universities are very strong core components of our mandate because of the nature, the normative nature of the work we do. UN Habitat is a small agency compared with UNDP or WHO, but we are one of the few agencies that our mandate cut across almost all the agencies. We have to deal with the issues of children, mortality, and so forth, because everything has some connection with the urban agenda. So the mandate for the climate change was to examine the contribution of cities. How are cities contributing to both the positive and the adverse nature of climate change? How can we use cities to mitigate and adapt to climate change? And also, for us to identify what are the promising mitigation and adaptation measures and policies. I hope you can read them there. And urbanization, as I said earlier, had proceeded largely in an uncontrolled way. The way people move into cities, the way they settle in communities, particularly in developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and huge parts also of some of the... Now, so, what is the root cause of the climate change? What really is the defining, what you might call the operating principles, is that the Earth's climate has been warming. The temperature has been increasing and has been leading to various risks and hazards in cities and also in the rural areas. What are the risks and what are the opportunities? Number one, in terms of the risk, because of what we said earlier, the concentration of population, industries, and infrastructure. When these are placed in places that are vulnerable, particularly in low-lying areas, like islands and places like Lagos and Mumbai, and all those areas that are susceptible to rising levels of water, there are great risks to people, to properties, and to human life. For instance, 13% of the world's urban population live in these low elevation coastal zones. But of course, the urban growth in the last 20 years and probably in the next 20 years will be much more focused on the least developed countries, because that's where people are still having many children. That's where people are still moving from the rural areas to the urban areas in a way that is very difficult for us to control. So the notion is, if you cannot control it, we need to find solutions to it in the same way that others have found solutions to it. What are the opportunities? Cities are also centers of innovation. Cities are the places where you concentrate. A university like Covenant University, the urban leads to agglomeration, what we call agglomeration of economies. Cities are places where you can concentrate companies and farms and services in a way that they can take advantage of these connections. Reduced transaction costs in terms of traveling up and down. When you go to most of the rural areas, part of the problem is really not so much that there are no infrastructure. Some have infrastructure. But the density of those areas are so high, are so low, that people are isolated from each other. You can reduce this isolation in cities because people can live on top of each other in high rises. They can live together in communities. You can connect pipe-borne water. You can connect electricity in a much more cheaper way, which is thing that you cannot do in the rural area because people are just so far apart from each other. And it's so costly, and it's not cost-effective. There are also mitigation opportunities in transportation, land use, patterns of production and consumption in cities. You can connect people with transportation much easily and realize the cost of doing so far more than you can do in rural areas. Then there's also economies of scale and proximity because of the concentration of population and enterprises, like I said earlier. One of the advantages really of having companies in one location, and this was why our founding fathers built places like Ikeja Industrial Estate, Isolo Industrial Estate, Ota, and so forth. The idea was to concentrate enterprises in the same spatial or geographic location so that exchange becomes less costly. People can speak to each other, you can walk across. In fact, one of the big examples of locational advantage is Silicon Valley in the United States. Many of you, I'm sure, have been there, or those who have read about it. One of the major advantages of Silicon Valley, where people like Steve Jobs invented the Apple computer and all those people, is that they were all within their social networks. People are always talking and gathering together and exchanging ideas. So cities bring together people, and exchange of information, knowledge, and ideas are easily far more concentrated in those areas. Now, the first thing, that the rising temperature has been causing both risks, but it also leaves us with some opportunities. Now, the other component of the climate change issue also is the human-induced greenhouse gas emission, particularly carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. 40 to 70% of using the, maybe I shouldn't go into these calculations. It doesn't distract us from what we're doing, but the estimate that we have is that between 40 to 70% of human emissions of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide is actually emitted by cities. Some other estimates say between 60 to 70%. So there's a big range, and there's a lot of argument in the international community about. But of course, cities are not the same. Lagos is different from, if you consider Covenant University a city, you cannot have the same emission here like you have, say, in Ajigule, or maybe you have in more dense areas. So these are all averages that people calculate using all kinds of methods. And the main sources of urban emissions is fossil fuels, like petroleum products, kerosene, petrol, and so forth. And the key centers of emission are the main buildings and transportation. The cars we use, the buildings. Of course, again, you have to differentiate between the poorer countries and the rich environments, like New York. New York or Chicago, they have different emission rates than you probably find here, because here, maybe half of the time we don't have light anyway, so you will not emit so much. But of course, our cars are always on the road, because again, lack of communication, we have to keep running up and down all the time. So the attention of the international community had been drawn to these issues, that we need to begin to reconsider the way we use fossil fuel. We need to begin to reconsider the kinds of buildings that we have. And this is where planners have a big role to play. This is where economists, scientists, everyone has a role to play. Of course, like we said here, it will, if we continue the way we are going, it will affect and disrupt the physical, economic, social, political stability of cities. Like we saw recently in Thailand, a whole town was completely submerged when there was flood. And this we see in places like Bangladesh every year, because it's a low-lying coastal area. And climate change is contributing to it because of the glacial melting that we see. But of course, it doesn't affect everyone in the same way. The poor always suffers. Women always tend to suffer more. Older people tend to be more affected by these things. And in the kinds of studies we have shown, the rich countries are able to cope far more than the poor countries. For instance, when you look at the earthquake in Haiti and Chile, they both happened within a month or two of each other. They were practically on the same Richter scale. Haiti was completely destroyed. And up to now, Haiti has not been able to get up. Chile, because of the coping strategy that they have, because of the nature of infrastructure in those cities and urban areas, they were able to recover quickly. So infrastructural deficit is a major starting point for dealing with climate change effects. But of course, what are the mitigation? Now, there is, you'll find that people use these two words, adaptation and mitigation, when it comes to climate change. Now, adaptation is adjusting to the system, making small incremental changes to the way we live, trying to do things differently than we normally do them. Whereas Mitigation is actually trying to remove the source of the problem. For instance, the change to electric cars will remove a large part of emissions. The change, for instance, using solar energy will remove a large part of the emissions from carbon-based energy sources. So those are mitigation. But adaptation is simply trying to make adjustments. And what we found is that governance capacity is a very critical factor. If you are not able to deal with the issues in normal times, if you have a government that is weak and unresponsive to people in normal times, when these adverse effects come, they also will not be able to deal with it. In other words, one of the things that the UN has been pushing is that the governance capacity of cities and countries should continuously be improved. That we should have less corrupt governments, that we should have people who are responsive to their people. For instance, you find congestion in many of our poor countries. And you keep seeing the same thing over and over. You come this year, you go next year, you come 20 years, the same place, the same congestion. It always breaks my heart anytime I go to where I grew up in Ibadan, and I see what I used to see 30 years. In fact, you almost can identify the same people sitting in the same place. And you are wondering, how come nothing changed? So therefore, urbanization has a lot of connection with modernization. Because you drive modernization by changing the way you live, by changing the way we do things, by innovating. And therefore, adaptation in urban areas could actually consist of very simple things, for instance. And what we have seen is that if we don't take those steps, like we saw in Ibadan, Lagos recently, it affects the livelihoods, not just the lives. People die. But people's life will change in a negative way for a very long time. So both lives and livelihoods are affected. Hundreds of millions of people who could actually be affected by simple changes that governments are able to make, by simply making the right kind of drainage, by just ensuring that when there's flood, the water can flow at least a little bit, by ensuring that you don't have too many potholes on high-density areas. Those are, very basic things that we have been given as tools. And one of the things that the UN does is provide all these tools to cities. Most developing countries' cities also face what we call adaptation deficit, which is what I just mentioned. We call them adaptation deficit because infrastructure, services, lack of governance. Yesterday, when I came, I was told that the Chancellor actually came to inspect this place yesterday. And I sat on my chair and I'm saying, how many ministers have actually visited where a construction is going on? Not talk less of where an event is going on. I was told how people were sleeping at 5 a.m. just to get this event going. And I'm sitting there with almost tears in my eyes. When are we going to get a leadership that will respond to the people? Where, you pass the same place every time. People are spending 3-4 hours. And, you see leadership just bypass and they go, they see, they go. So, we face this adaptation deficit, not so much oftentimes, not because of money. I think Nigeria cannot claim to not have money to do the basic things. But because our governance capacity is really questionable. So we really thank God when we see islands of excellence like this. And I hope others will copy it. The projection by UN Habitat is that by 2020, we have close to 900 million people who will be living in slum conditions, like we defined it earlier. In other words, those who have these multiple deprivations, lack of water, overcrowding, bad housing, lack of sanitation, and lack of secure tenure. And most of them are located in high-risk zones, Places where if there's small calamity, it will magnify itself 100 times. Most of them are located in those places. And this is why we are calling attention to these things. That the problem of climate change, or the issue of climate change, is not so much alone about the rising temperature and also rising emission, but also of governance capacity or lack of it in our cities. Now, let me see how we can move a bit quicker. Can you go to the next slide? Future directions. Now, what are the future directions? Because we've expanded a little bit on some of those. For those who want the PowerPoint, I think you can see the personnel of Covenant University. They can share them with you. It's a very long presentation, but I think we have made the point about both the sources and the consequences of climate change, and the fact that lack of response, lack of urban governance capacity is actually at the root of the problem. But, what are the future directions? For instance, in terms of both national and regional policies, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? Let's take international policies. What can we do? What can you request from, say, an agency like the United Nations or UNDP and others? Making financial resources more available to support vulnerable cities that require additional resources, including through financial mechanisms within the United Nations framework on climate change. Making information on climate change science option for mitigation and adaptation more widely available, which is what we are calling attention, that there's a rich source of information that, I'm sorry to say, Nigeria don't even ask for it. We don't ask for it, we don't care about it, and we are members of the UN body. A lot of the time we see officials, they visit us, and the list of the problem that they have is we say, carry these reports, carry these CDs, and oftentimes they will forget all the reports and the CDs there. I've seen this happen many times. So there's a lot of information. There's a lot of database that are available that we can use in comparative perspective. And then easing the bureaucratic burdens on local access to international support. Now, many countries, especially the Scandinavians, always shy from giving money to Nigeria because they think Nigeria has money. They feel that we are just not spending the money in a responsible way. But what I have seen is that when you have a plan, when you have done your own bit, there are still quite a number of countries and donors who are ready to assist, especially with this issue of climate change. Sometimes it's a bit complicated, the mechanism that they use. And of course, there's still some reluctance on the part of the advanced industrial countries. But I know that there are specialists who know how to access some of these monies. Now, at the national level, what can we do? Design and implement national mitigation strategies and adaptation planning. And one of the collaborations we are having with Covenant University is that we want this place to be a center of excellence. I was talking to the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor and the people who came to Nairobi. We've agreed, actually, that Covenant University will be one of those centers who will be training cities and local governments on what we call global urban observatories. In 3 years ago, I brought some staff to Abuja. We spent a whole week talking about these issues, but it didn't go anywhere. Once we left, nobody contacted us. But I know here they won't let me rest. This is what I found out about this place. They will be the one to chase you up and remind you. Now, what do we do with the Global Urban Observatory? It's actually a data management software that gives you access right on your table. All you need is 2 or 3 staff members who can learn how to run that program, and you can feed any information to it. You can know exactly what's going on in your city just on your table. You can project population growth, you can project this, you can do, and both in graphics, in tables, in all kinds of ways that are easily done by someone who has just average skill in, it's like running a word program. We've developed this so well that a lot of CEOs in cities, for instance, the Arab states, have taken it on board so much. Part of what they use in monitoring the Hajj in Jeddah and Medina is the Global Urban Observatory. They invested millions. And because we have not had much success in Africa, in fact, there's no single country who has really responded. In Mexico, we have about 340 cities that have the Global Urban Observatory on there. So we call it Local Urban Observatory. So it's right on the office of the mayor or somebody. So we after we had a discussion, we thought one of the ways to help our country and the countries be, and this place could be the center of excellence for the whole of Africa, the whole of West Africa to start with. So this is one of the things we are going to do in terms of designing and planning for the future. And also to enhance coordination and streamlining between cities, sectors, and regions. Again, if you have information, and this is one of the pet talks of Bishop, if you don't have information, you are as good as dead. One of the things that is killing us is that we lack information. Information has to convert to knowledge, and thereafter you have wisdom as to what to do with it. We don't have, it's a major deficit. In fact, it's one of the major knowledge deficits, knowledge infrastructure deficits of our society, that we never seem to have information on many things. And I believe that this kind of collaboration can also help us. And also, one of the ways in which other cities have been trying to mitigate or even use in the planning process is to offer incentives like tax exemptions, incentive for investment in energy, renewable energy sources and so forth for different cities. They give tax, for instance, one of the ways in which Europe, much of Europe, I know in Germany, Spain, UK, for instance, where they're encouraging people to use solar, is that they give you the difference between what you will pay for conventional power and installing a power. Because one of the disincentives of solar power for now is the higher level of capital installment. So what they do is that once you do it in a transparent way, if you put a solar say panel in your house, you can claim the difference between the normal electrical power supply and using solar, the cost difference. You can always claim it every month or every quarter. So this has been encouraging a lot of people to install solar panels in their homes in Spain, in Germany, and so forth. So parts of these incentives are things that we hope, collaborating with Covenant University, we are going to be pushing forward in the future. We've also agreed to do some long-range studies together. When you have a place like this that can actually track the community in which they live and provide information to cities and also the local governments in terms of precisely what is the poverty level, what are the inequality indicators and so forth. These are things we have developed just like that. They are things that you can find in most UN, they can run it in a system just like that. But when you go to an average ministry maybe except for Lagos State, I don't know. But people have no information how their people are living. And for us, this is not an acceptable way to live our lives. And then in terms of city policies, we need to create what we call an urban risk map. I mean, for now, the GIS has allowed us to do many things. You know, many cities now have their own maps. They can actually map to the very high resolution. I saw one recently that some people did for Osun State, and I was really impressed. I could see my former Awolowo Hall right there on those maps. You can track everything, and with that, people use it not just for tax collection, which is a very important role, a very important capacity for government to have, but also to draw what you call now urban map risks. So you know the most vulnerable areas in the cities. You know where the slums are. And then you know the kinds of intervention that are required on a long-term basis. If you cannot make all the investment in 1 year, you can plan it over the next 3 years and 5 years. And let people know that this is the plan. And also to integrate risk prevention in urban planning. And this, of course, is for our colleagues who are in planning. On the basis of the urban risk map, which have been taken up a lot in East Asia and a lot of Latin American countries, and also include climate-sensitive features in infrastructure investment, in building, the roads and so forth. These days, people introduce all those climate-sensitive issues into those plans and designs. And of course, also to establish a framework of collaboration or cooperation with other cities and governments. For instance, there is no reason why the whole of the Southwest cannot have a common collaborative agreement on several issues. You move around the Southwest and you're wondering, why don't we have a common rail transportation system between all these areas? In the same manner, I believe the other regions in the country, even though constitutionally we have been fragmented, we shouldn't be fragmented in our mind as to what we can do together. So I believe that there are so many other issues, but the idea of today's discussion is to raise the issues, simply to prompt all of us, including students, to begin to think in a holistic sense about the nature of migration, the way we live, the nature of planning, the nature of economies. One of the great issues for us is also about the economies of the city, the nature of employment. I didn't want to go there because it's a very large subject that we have been pushing also. Employment has become a major issue for us in the UN, trying to sensitize governments to be responsible. Concluding, city authorities can have an important influence over both greenhouse gas emission and also adaptations to climate change. And when we say cities, we also mean states, federal and so forth. And also climate change responses cannot be effective without adequate emphasis on local action. Local action, extremely important. What can we do as individuals? What can we do as communities? What can we do in Ota? What can we do in Agege? What can we do in the other areas? And that urban planning is fundamental for effective climate change action, both in doing mitigation and also in doing adaptation. So looking ahead, normally there are a long list of issues, but I want to restrict myself to 3. Number 1 is that we need to consider alternative energy sources. I want to see, for instance, Covenant University in the next 10 years being a center of excellence for solar energy, not just for demonstrating it and also having people who are the frontiers of it. We always wait for others to do what they are doing. We wait for China to come up with things and we just buy. You know, a lot of people are always saying, oh, Africa, we have one of the largest adoption of GSM. And I always say, which one are we making? We just use it. We don't make anything. But this has to change now. You know, one of the visions of Bishop is that every time you meet with him, he's always saying, no, we need a new Nigeria. This has to change. We shouldn't be consumption-oriented, we should be production-oriented. One of the areas in which we can take the lead, it may not yield immediate benefit, and this is where these other people are always ahead of us. For us, it's about investing today and getting the profit next week. They are always looking far ahead. They are looking to 2020. They are looking beyond MDG 2015. They are looking far ahead. I've been to factories in China where they make solar panels. And the guy was telling us, oh no, you know, we started this even before it became an issue. I've seen electric cars being made. They say, oh no, we've been doing this before because we know it's going to come. And when it comes, we want to be ahead. I want to be one making money from it. So electric car is one direction that we can begin to think about. Renewable energy like solar is one direction because parts of it are proven. They are really proven. Like solar water heaters are proven. Israel has used for 40 years. If you go to Cyprus, you go to many European countries, and in fact in Malaysia and a couple of countries now, it is a legislation now that in new estates you are not allowed to use conventional water heating. You must put solar water heaters because it's proven. So these technologies that are proven, we can begin to adapt it and then begin to make it ourselves. Because we are right under the equator. People now, they look at some fake things that have been done in the cities. You take your eyes off that and see that there are possibilities. Then number 2, increase urban density to promote walking, distance travel, and cycling. One of the dangers we are seeing these days is that while the rich countries are beginning to promote walking and building curbs and so forth, you find a huge, previously poor countries like China are now going the opposite direction. I don't know whether you remember, I'm sure the older people here remember when you go to China in those days, you see huge mass of bicycle in Shanghai, in Beijing, and then suddenly, and also in India, I lived in India for a whole year, and suddenly everybody wants to ride in a car, even when you don't have to walk. So this is the opposite that is happening now. There are concurrent events in the two regions. In Europe, people are emphasizing walking, keeping healthy, using electric cars, using all these things, and then because affluence has come to the formerly poor countries, we're also now repeating their mistakes. And I think this is one of the messages that we are trying to push and say, we don't have to go the way they did. We should do things in a smarter way than they did it. And of course, buildings. The planners will understand this more than myself. Applying improved technologies, applying low energy saving bulbs and so forth in our buildings. Ladies and gentlemen, Chancellor, our colleagues, Your Royal Highnesses, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I just want to reiterate one more time that today is not just about a university that is taking the lead. As the VC said, the only other universities where we have launched this report is the London School of Economics in April and the Columbia University, two great universities in Europe and America. This is only the third university where we are launching this report. And I'm grateful that I'm part of this story. I want to thank the Chancellor. I want to thank everybody who has been involved, Professor Emekun, one of them, who God used them for this day. And I want to thank all of you for being part of this story. Thank you, sir. God bless you.
Please, may we rise and give the director from the UN Nairobi office a clap offering for a wonderful delivery, for a wonderful presentation. He has just presented the report. We will be inviting the Vice Chancellor to invite the Director again to now present the report formally to the Chancellor, and for the Chancellor to formally launch that report, and then we can take the interactive session. The Vice Chancellor, ma. The ushering team, get ready. That launch will go with those balloons. This is history in the making.
Thank you very much, the Master of Event, Dr. Ikenyao. I'd like to again appreciate Professor Oyeyinka for that erudite presentation. Very lucidly presented, and I know that we have been able to pick a thing or two. Jim Rohn once said that the future does not get better by hope, the future gets better by plan. And right now, it is again my privilege to invite Professor Oyeyinka from the UN Habitat to make the formal presentation of the Global Report on Cities and Human Settlements, Climate Change, to the Chancellor of Covenant University, the highlight of this very event before the formal launch. Professor Oyeyinka, thank you.
I hereby present the Global Report on Human Settlement 2011 by the United Nations Habitat to the Chancellor of Covenant University, Dr. David Oyedepo.
Thank you very much. It's my very singular honor this afternoon to launch this bank of information that will help us avert impending dangers in our country and the world at large. Until we change the way we think, we cannot change the way we live. And I believe this bank of information will influence the way we think so we can begin to change the way we live. It's therefore on this note that I declare the launching of Global Report on Human Settlement 2011, Cities and Climate Change, for the benefit of mankind, for transmission of information that will lead to transformation of lives and help our continent out of our deplorable state to begin to find practical solutions to our obvious problems. Therefore, on behalf of everyone present here, I today declare this report launched. Amen. Thank you very much.
We again put our hands together as we acknowledge the formal launch of the UN Global Report for the very first time on any platform in the African continent, happening today, the 18th of October, as one of the events to celebrate the 9th anniversary of the Founders' Day of Covenant University. To God alone be all the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Another resounding applause. We appreciate the Chancellor of Covenant University for formally doing this. And I know Covenant University will connect with making sure we drive all the parameters as this university becomes a center for driving change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The book or the report has been presented and it has been launched. We invited professional bodies and associations because we want them to look at the issues that have been raised and probably make some comments, suggestions, and profile solution on what the book is all about. Covenant University is not just interested in being the first to launch this report. It is interested in seeing that the content of that report is something to take home, is something to work with. So we'll be inviting the professional associations and other interested participants to make comments. Before then, The deputy head of the UN office, the Habitat Office in Nigeria, Mr. Paul Okunola, will kickstart this session with a 5-minute presentation about UN Habitat and Nigeria. I therefore invite Mr. Paul Okunola to take it up from here.
Our dearly beloved Daddy and Father in the Lord, the Chancellor and Chairman Board of Regents, Governor University, all distinguished guests on the high table, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I stand on the existing protocol. My task is simply to try to situate what we are doing today in the context of our local environment, Nigeria. Essentially is to ask or try to answer the question, why should we be concerned? Until recently, climate change appeared to be a very exotic term that big countries gather year after year to discuss. Why is it that we should be concerned in Nigeria? And why is it that we should seek to work with what we could call Generation Next in taking this issue forward in our own dear country, Nigeria? Basically, from the presentation of my boss, the professor, we've seen that the relationship between climate change and urbanization of cities has been very clearly established. With 40 to 70% of emissions causing climate change coming from cities, we really need to be concerned. And why even more so in Nigeria? The information that's available to us tells us that over the past century, if we take, for instance, from 1890, there were just about 23 cities with populations of up to 20,000 people in Nigeria. That was just about 120 years ago. By 50 years or thereabouts later, in 1953, the number had risen to 56. In other words, a population of about 3.2 million or 7%. 1963, the figure was 183 cities. That had a population of 10.6 million or 19% of the total population. In the 1991 census, it gave us a figure of 359 cities. 31.8% of the total population. And by 2004, the figure was 840 cities with at least 20,000 people in Nigeria. And of note is that that represented 48.2% of Nigeria's total population. Until recently, we hear Nigeria is a predominantly rural society. Nigeria is a predominantly, what this tells us is that we are barely still rural. And from projections by 2015, it's estimated that Nigeria will cross the 50% mark of urbanization. In other words, at least half of Nigerians in the next 4 years will be living in cities. Why we are also particularly concerned is that in Nigeria, of this huge population, 48% today is about 62 million people. Of this number of city dwellers, 70%, 7 out of every 10, or well over 40 million Nigerians live in slums. Now, given the challenge that our professor has told us about, Nigeria is one of those reasons that needs to be concerned about how the way we are living is going to affect our lifestyles in future years. And I beg to remind our professor, just about 3 weeks ago, just to illustrate the implications of some of these population movements. About 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks, together we were in Osun State on mission, and we had audience with the state governor who, until not too long ago, was commissioner for works in Lagos State. And he recalled a survey that he carried out when he was still in Lagos. He said he wanted to find out how many, the total length of streets from expressway to major roads to minor roads to inner city lanes, the total length of roads in Lagos State. And they worked it out, they calculated it. He then asked, how many cars do we have in Lagos? And interestingly, they did a survey and estimated the total number of cars in Lagos. The message, shocking as it was I told us that if you take the total, if you line up all the cars in Lagos State and take the length of the cars in Lagos State one after the other, you need 3 times the number of roads in Lagos State to be able to accommodate them. That is one of the manifestations of the challenge of urbanization. So in Nigeria, the Prof also mentioned what is described as governance capacity deficiency. And over the last 2 years, our office, UN Habitat Office in Nigeria, worked with the Oslo Governance Center and the United Nations Development Program to carry out what they called a good urban government assessment, good urban governance assessment of Nigeria, looking at 20 cities in about 8 states. And they looked at about 5 parameters: effectiveness, equity, accountability, participation, and security. And the message they gained from that study was that in almost every single one of these parameters, there were glaring deficiencies in the way we rule our cities. If we cannot rule our cities, therefore, it doesn't look likely we'll be able to address the problems coming from urbanization. And so that's where Habitat comes in. In 2001, the former executive director, Anna Tibaijuka, met with the former president, General Olusegun Obasanjo, and they agreed that Nigeria, being what it is in Africa, would be a standard, a very useful entry point to start getting other African nations to address the problems of urbanization. And so the UN Habitat Program Office for Nigeria, its acronym is HAPSO, was established, and it became operational in 2003. And essentially our mandate also is like the UN Habitat mandate, promoting sustainable urbanization and adequate housing for all. What have we done? Our country program document tells us that we need to provide technical assistance in participatory urban governance, management, and in other related aspects of managing our urban centers. One of our major projects, we then went into a series of projects, and one of them was the Water for African Cities Phase 2 in Jos. There's the Water for Africa, Asian Cities and Water for African Cities. Jos was selected to participate in the Nigerian program, and it involved providing water and associated infrastructure in suburban areas and peri-urban areas where most of the new growth in cities take place, and where obviously most of the infrastructure deficiencies can also be found. So we're able to do something about that. But again, another governance component, the crisis in Jos has limited that project, and so we are not exactly where we'd had hoped to be at this time. But on the area of success, we've been able to deliver in 2 Nigerian states so far. Anambra State was the first, where we started to promote what they call the production of structure plans. A structure plan is a long-term vision to guide the growth and development of cities. And the government, we delivered structure plans for Awka, the state capital, Onitsha, one of the most vibrant commercial centers in the country, and Nnewi. Riding on the heels of that, we recently concluded city consultations, which is a part of this process, in Nasarawa State, where we are trying to conclude provision of structure plans for Lafia, the capital, Doma, Kefi, and Karu. Now, to do this, a new methodology called the Rapid Urban Sector Profiling for Sustainability, RUSPS, is being used. And the essence of it is that it is participatory, it is rapid, it is cross-cutting. Because if you decide, like most of the former master plans used to do, to just rule out the cities in new plans, you're not taking care of where people will live. You're not taking care of where people will earn their livelihoods. And so these are some of the things that have worked together to limit the success of previous plans. So we've done that in 2 states already, and we are talking with Ogun State, we are talking with Osun State, we are talking with Ekiti State, Abia State, and on that basis, the UN in Nigeria, and just a point of correction, we are UN Habitat, there's a larger UN led by a resident coordinator, is now trying to push that program through the Nigerian Governors Forum so that all states will be able to develop their towns and cities. Now, again, like we said, the problem of slums is one of the most critical problems in urbanization in our cities. So we are doing a participatory slum upgrading program in Afako and Egege in Lagos. And of course, we mentioned the GUG assessment, which has led to further new projects that are being signed down the line. Now, we thank God for what is happening here today. Earlier, we also have been talking with the Federal University of Technology in Minna about a memorandum of understanding to be able to teach this issue of urban sector profiling so that we can develop a capacity to be able to deliver quick and rapid intervention in cities. They are, in that university, also now trying to look at a Department of Local Government Studies that will incorporate this. I'm sure with what is going on here, they will also be further encouraged. Finally, what we have also tried to do, talking of climate change, is the issue of looking at the Nigerian Building Code, which was recently launched, and we are trying to find out how we can bring out the climate aspects of it and be able to deliver housing that is climate sensitive. Just last week, finally, our agency was involved in what is the ongoing review of the Nigerian National Housing Policy and the Nigerian National Urban Development Policy. Those two documents have just been upgraded and they were delivered to the Ministry of Housing last week, and we are believing that with new opportunities like this, UN HAPSO is on the ground to assist whatever strides Covenant would like to take. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paul Okunola. We always have a privilege to have our daddy in the house, the Chancellor and Chairman of this occasion, always present. And I know we'll be blessed to hear his own perspective as he gives his own remark at this August occasion. I therefore will advise us to rise as we usher in the chairman of this occasion, the Chancellor of Covenant University, to give his closing remarks. Dr. David Oyebanji.
Thank you. Please, let's be seated. Standing on all existing protocols, and want to first of all appreciate the highly explorative presentation of the UN Director as presented to all of us. All of the comments are very plausible and that will lead us forward. But the important thing to note is most of these things can only be implemented successfully on very sound policies of government. Very sound policies of government. Transportation, there is no personal effort, no private effort can solve a mass transportation problem without a policy of government that makes that possible. Unfortunately, the political will to do that is not there. Our greatest challenge today in Nigeria is basic infrastructures. That cannot be done by any group of people or private organizations. It has to be by a profound policy of government that must see the wisdom in outsourcing. There must be the engagement of the wisdom of outsourcing. I mean, you can imagine if we're still waiting on NITEL till now, there'll be no communication. We must get to understand the place of outsourcing. It's the fundamental law of development economy. We have to. I mean, if we had to depend on Nigerian government for air transportation, we won't be anywhere. The Nigerian government has not one airplane at the airport. We must wake up to this reality, and I think that we are the best to address ourselves on this. The government needs to wake up. Billions is spent on road and infrastructure every year according to the paper reports. But there is no proof anywhere. Covenant University has put in close to 150 million in trying to help fix the roads in Otahia. Yet you can see it. Because even to help, you still need to apply. That we want to help you. Can we help you? So we have a system that is highly insensitive to the demands of the hour. I love what the chairman of the estate valuer said. I was on that road 7 hours that day. I was flying into Calabar, but because of the heavy rain, there was no way to land in Calabar, so we had to remain in Nigeria, in Lagos, and then to travel from airport to Ota took me 7 hours. People were actually swimming on the road. That is, young fellows, you put their bag on their back and they were swimming on the road. That's the level of water that was there. But why so much of this information is pushed across at personal level, at some official levels, they are not taken because we are dealing with people who are largely illiterate. People in government are largely illiterate. Their interest in knowledge and information is near zero. So there is nothing you present. The plague of money politics has eroded the intellect of a number of Nigerian leaders, and that's where the problem is. I think that the United Nations Habitat should look at it from that perspective. We should approach government from United Nations headquarters on issues, on policies to match these inventions. Otherwise, we'll be talking forever. Government has not one dime in Canaan land, not one stone contributed. And I keep wondering, okay, why do you want to charge for where you have no input? It's absurd. In developed countries, private universities are on the budget of national budget because they have to give them necessary encouragement to keep solving national problems. But that's where we find ourselves today. And I believe there must be a revolution in the political arena before we can actually drive anything that will redeem us from a total collapse. Anything that could reduce the nation from a total collapse. There is gross insensitivity and massive ignorance on the part of people in government. That this kind of thing, you give it to them, it's dumped. How much money is in it? That's what they're looking for. What can I get from it? That's what they're looking for. And I really believe that Nigeria should be very sensitive. The widespread protest, the Wall Street Occupy campaign that's going on is a signal that something may strike in Nigeria any moment. Any moment. And that will be so uncontainable. And that's why it's important for us to, those of us who have the hearing of some of our leaders, to talk to them and let them know they are playing with sitting on a keg of gunpowder. If this thing breaks out, they don't have the capacity, they don't have intellectualism to handle it. So how are they going to survive? Nigeria has been afflicted by poor government. Poor governance. That's our greatest problem. And I do hope that something here will help spark off a new way of doing things. Outsourcing is key to development economy. Outsourcing. Get them to do the roads. Let them charge their tolls electronically. You're free. Construction goes on in Houston every year. A massive road network. 5 pies of overflies. Government don't pay one dime for any. It's outsourced. But then you can't drive in for free. You are charged electronically and then you can pass on. I am of the opinion that the government has no capacity or the morality to successfully revamp our infrastructure. They don't have the capacity. One, they don't have the morality. They don't have the morality to do it. And if you want it done, why don't we outsource and then let people pay for services that they receive? Nigerians will pay for the services that they receive. And let them own these roads 25 years. Why are we wasting our destiny? Let them own these roads 25 years according to the contract, or 30 years or 40 years. We want it done. We want people so that we can keep up the armed robbers from the highway. But these things, we've been struggling with it, and because of people having so much to take from it, they will never buy outsourcing. They will never buy it. Nothing about government has worked. All of us know it. So why are we pretending? Nothing that the government runs has ever worked. And if you want things to work, why don't you go down there? Water here is Covenant University generated. Power is Covenant. And so what morality has government to come here to ask for rent? come here to ask me, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's actual political robbery. It doesn't make any sense. Oh, okay, you bought the land, you got everything, and then the still say, come and pay. For what? What you didn't build? That's why I think that we need to really get on and get something going. Number two thing I want to mention here, from the very onset, Covenant University has been committed to improving on the lot of the masses. And in combating the carbon-based emissions that the United Nations is concerned about, we are coming out with some things that are very close to coming out of the pipeline and have been tested. We have succeeded at Covenant University in building the fuelless generator. Amen. The 200 kVA is already working and running our CD factory. Now, the 500 kVA is ready and will be commissioned this coming week. Fuelless generator. That goes a long way to put this up. I mentioned that to Mr. President and he's very excited about coming down to be part of saying that flagged off. So we are a part of the solution, not of the problems. I want to remain so as the Lord helps us. As I close this my remark, it is our privilege and honor to have this launch on our campus today and to appreciate all the eminent personalities that have come to join with us and with the United Nations in getting this done. This launch is a validation of our collaborative relationship with United Nations Habitat and Covenant University. And I want to believe that it will be a lot of steps forward as the media helps us to project the values of this report. We are, this is an educational center. Our intention is to see how we can help through intellectual discourse and intercourse, help to improve on the lots of our people. Nigeria has unusual potentials and will not watch it collapse. We'll be part of recovering the values, the culture, and the beauty of our nation and the continent of Africa at large. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Let's clap for the Chancellor again. Thank you. You may be pleased be seated. To give the vote of thanks, I would like to invite the Dean of College of Development Studies, Situating Development, Professor Kayode Shoremeko, to give the vote of thanks.
Protocols. I'm sure that we have all had a very stimulating session today. It is very unprecedented because probably for the first time in the history of tertiary education, a university, Covenant University Ota, is partnering with the United Nations. And in saying this, I want to first of all thank God for the fact that the bilateral linkage between myself and Professor Oyeyinka has borne fruit today. And from all indications, what it means is that anybody who is receiving university education in Covenant University has the potential of ending up at the United Nations, courtesy of an internship program, which is very, very unprecedented. We want to really thank God for this. And when we started this, in just a bilateral context, it was extended and we got ample support from the Vice Chancellor. I want to thank you very much for this. and also the Chancellor. What we are aiming for is that in future, this place will become a solar city. And you know what that means? That is like we are spelling the mortality, so to say, of NEPA or PHCN. Having said that, I want to thank all of us for sitting through this program and virtually envisaging and view Nigeria's future. I want to thank the Board of Regents, that is the proprietor base of this university, the Elders Council of the church, and also members of the Living Faith Church. I also want to thank the Oloto of Ota and his entourage for coming to this program. Certainly, Ota itself will not be the same again, because the duties of a university are teaching, research, and public service. And that public service means Ota will be the immediate beneficiary, by the grace of God, of this particular enterprise. I also want to thank colleagues from other universities who have been here. At least they know what it is like now, what it means to do a catch-up. That is, if they ever catch up. I also want to thank particularly the former Vice-Chancellor of University of Benin. That is Professor Alele Williams, in the sense that, at the risk of sounding personal, I'm a father of 6 girls. So whenever I see someone like Professor Alele Williams, I always say, yes, I mean, this is the way my own daughters will end up. And of course, we must not forget to thank the future. That's the students of Covenant University. All these are being prepared for you. And may you come into all of this in Jesus' name. And of course, on the more personal note, Mrs. Bright, my regards to Tayo. And of course, Dupe Ogunoti, thank you very much for coming. God bless you all. Thank you.